So Thomas, it's a really exciting time for data centres. We're seeing projected growth of 12% on year in the Australian data centre market. We're seeing data centres consuming 4% of the energy in the national electricity market at the moment, and projections are that in 2025 they're going to consume 20% of the global energy demand. And when you correlate that with the massive explosion in renewables globally, and when we look at what's happening here in Australia, 6 gigawatts have installed or under construction capacity in the last 12 months, $11 billion worth of investment. Despite the policy uncertainty, these projects are still happening. It seems to me it presents an amazing opportunity for Asia's largest renewables developer, Vena Energy, to assist data centres with their energy needs. What do you see the opportunity?
Yeah, it isn't absolutely, and what we see is there's a good synergy there, because data is now also starting to drive renewable energy. So we're seeing much smarter renewable energy with the smarter inverters, battery integration into more traditional wind and sort of solar panels. So we're seeing those two things go hand in hand, and the next thing, of course, is trying to power these data centers through renewables. And the challenge there really is a data center needs very reliable power 24/7. Some of the earlier renewable tended to be more intermittent. So, we always talk about what happens when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. Well, the good thing is we do know when the sun shines, and we're getting a good idea of when the wind blows, and now we can actually just work around it. So the challenge now really is a commercial challenge. Already now we're seeing renewables being cheaper than traditional forms of generation. And that's driven, as you said, despite the policy certainty, the uptake of renewable compared to non-renewable, even across the world, but particularly in Australia, is just phenomenal. And that is just because it is simply more cheap. And that's really what we want to try and now bring to a lot of the consumers, particularly data centers. That's very large customer-facing loads. So we're seeing a huge interest from a demand pull side. And now we're starting to work, as a developer, we're starting to work with the consumers, with the data centers, and also the other players in the market, particularly the retailers, but also the Australian market operator, energy operator, just to help integrate some of the renewables safely into that space. We're also looking down the track where we're seeing overseas, particularly in the United States, but also to a smaller degree in Europe, where a lot of data centers move away from the big cities, where you have a lot of data centers in one space and you have a lot of good technical experts there. What we're seeing there is the opportunity to go off-grid, and particularly in Australia there's a huge opportunity. So once we get towards 2020 with that load really increasing, to levels that are really hard to understand, how much data, electricity this will be required to power these data centers, what we'll probably see is more of an off-grid solution where really smart renewables, particularly around batteries, integrations will come into the fore. And that's why we're working for today, is to try and work with the customers towards that future.
Yep. So Thomas, it's 2019. Let's imagine that I'm a big data center operator. What solution can you provide me for my renewable energy requirements?
Yeah, listen, absolutely. And I think what we talk about there is the first step for you is to become a really challenging customer to us. And I think we need to move away from the really year on year, you go out to 3 retailers, just give me the best offer, what is the lowest price here and now, to you guys really challenging us to come up with a product that is right for you guys. We've heard today at this great conference about smaller data centers in the middle of Canberra compared to very large, distributed data centers across the nation. And I think it's making sure that you get a solution that works for you. So you need to challenge us in tailoring that up and make sure that we take your purchasing strategies into account. And that's why we're partnering up with retailers. We're not the expert across the entire network, but really try and find somebody who can provide a solution that works for you and doesn't come with one solution for everyone. Very important there. So the World Wildlife Foundation is setting up their Business Renewable Council. So that's a website anyone can join to get a lot of free resources and to what sort of questions to ask, because that's often the challenging thing. You move from a situation where you're 100% serviced by your retailer, not necessarily knowing what questions to ask is often the first step. And the BRC has done a lot of good work where we're a founding member as well, because we support being more informed. And the BRC is a great way to start. And then talking to people who know the industry well, like yourselves at Ashurst from a legal point of view, or even challenge some of the developers to really answer your questions. And like always, there's no dumb questions.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned that some of the challenges facing data center owners and operators around procuring renewables is what happens if the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, really seeking to understand what their own requirements are before they go to market. One size doesn't necessarily fit all, but do you see any other challenges or impediments to the implementation of this?
Yeah, listen, absolutely. And again, it depends on how much of the energy the data center want to spend on on energy procurement. We've heard today of people who are considering setting up their own energy teams. So they'll use on-site generation to reduce load when the spot price is very high, and then they'll buy off the grid when the spot price is not high. And it's very heartening from my point of view as a developer to hear how engaged some of these consumers are, really around trying to help us firm some of that stuff and therefore pass on the savings to them. But of course, we'll also cater for people who have less opportunities to take advantage of those sort of deliverables. So we will actually now partnering with people who have 24/7 generation and making sure that you'll never be without power.
And so I guess one final question, Thomas. Let's fast forward to 2030. Conceivably, cost of renewables has fallen even further. Uptake of renewables has grown exponentially. Let's hope so. Let's also hope that there's some more clarity around policy settings to foster and encourage renewables. I guess in that context, what do you think the world looks like for the integration of renewables into data?
Yeah, that's right. So by 2030, as you mentioned yourself, data centers are really very large power users at that situation. So I think that when you start designing future data centers, you're looking at not just the really good work that people are doing today with energy efficiency, but you'd actually integrate power into your buildings. Even though it's probably not commercial at the moment, we're seeing things like Tesla solar panels, where you can actually build your rooftop out of solar panels now as building materials. We'll see a lot more of those sorts of things. We're seeing solid state batteries that can act as walls, so it's actually built as wall materials, and really a huge integration. But the amount of energy that is consumed by data centers means that there's still going to be utility scale renewables, particularly solar and wind in the shorter term, so up to 2030, which will require distributed resources with large, safe transmission lines going into it. And then we'll use smart inverters and other technologies to make sure that the power is of a good quality, so it has the right voltage and the right frequency, so as to not impede upon the data center and the data stored in the sensors, which is obviously very, very important. The other thing is really the integration of the electricity smoothing, which is done right now through flywheels or other inverter-based technologies within the data centers. Hopefully by 2030, the grid will be stable enough that that's no longer necessary to the same degree as today.